The Soul Redeemer, Book 3, Chapter 38, Gilgamesh, Underground in Iraq. The general stood looking at the clone in disbelief. This is the great and mighty Gilgamesh? An array of emotions flooded him as he contemplated his fate in the face of failure. Before him was the cloned body of a monstrosity. Seething anger was quickly turning to rage. "Humphreys, you fool! What have you done?" he yelled as he thrust his fist against the steel wall. In a calm but authoritative voice, Humphreys answered, "I have done exactly what I said I would do. I have taken a strand of DNA and by recreating cell upon cell, I have built an exact replica of the one you are searching for, with the exception that we have added a strand of computer code to his DNA so that he can directly interface with the net." The general moved in close to the ugly face of the one who should be God, man, and machine. "What is your name?" he taunted. As with any clone's training, he stood still, looking straight ahead as he answered without emotion. "Gilgamesh, General." "What is your assignment?" "I am awaiting my orders." "You are a mistake, a blankety-blank mistake." The general used several other choice words to express his frustration and then turned his anger back onto Humphreys. In contrast to the general's loud ramblings, Seer spoke in a very low tone of voice as she eyed the topic of conversation and said, "Humphreys has done his job. This is no mistake." Then with authority, the beautiful sorceress turned to the general. "Now it is time for me to do my job. The body is ready to receive the spirit of Gilgamesh, but I will not tolerate this rage. You will either be quiet or leave us." The general was not used to being given ultimatums, and he glared at Seer momentarily as he reviewed his options. There were none. Reluctantly, he said, "I will stay. If you are certain that this is no mistake, you may continue." Seer looked hard into his eyes for one moment and then said, "Sit over there." When the general was seated, the lights automatically went out. The room was pitch black and utterly quiet. And then, ever so softly, Seer began speaking in unholy tongues, her voice rising in volume as she conjured the spirits that would be of service. There was a flash of light, and the smell of a burning match filled the air. She lit 3 candles. The atmosphere in the room was unnaturally calm. Then, without warning, the temperature plummeted, and the general found himself shivering. Whether his body's reaction was from the cold or from sudden fear that assaulted him, he was uncertain. And then a swirling sensation filled the room as invisible yet very real beings circled around and around like vultures circling their prey before suddenly seizing it. So great became the motion that the general bent over to avoid blacking out. It seemed like only a moment later that the swirling stopped, and he sat back up in his chair. Opening his eyes, he found that the lights were on, and the beastly clone was standing in front of him. "Feeling better, General?" Gilgamesh asked. "You've been out for some time." The general eyed him before answering. "What do you mean? I just put my head down for a moment." Gilgamesh answered, "Indeed, it's been more than a moment. 6 hours have now passed." The general stood to his feet and nearly fell over. Grasping the back of the chair until the dizziness stopped, he then stood taking charge of the situation, or so he thought. Humphreys was nowhere in sight. Seer stood near the table where the candles had burned. They were melted completely down, and some of the wax had dripped onto the floor, mixing in with what looked to be a pool of blood. "I don't know what kind of witchery you are about, woman, but I'll have no more of it," the general threatened. "Interesting," Gilgamesh said, smiling at Seer. "Mother, this human seems to think that he can order us about. I think I will have no more of it." Even though the general held a 7th-degree black belt before he could see it coming, Gilgamesh had him pinned, intending to choke him to death. "Stop it," Seer ordered. "Like it or not, we need this human." Still keeping the general in his grasp, he did release the pressure, allowing him to breathe. Then suddenly, he threw the man to the floor like a wet rag. "You're right as always, sweetheart," Gilgamesh said. The general stood up and straightened his uniform. "Just what do you need me for?" he asked. Gilgamesh explained. "You are going to introduce me to the world. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Nimrod, host to the spirits of Gilgamesh, Apollo, and Osiris. However, until my unveiling, you will call me Armilus." What had just been an ugly shell of a mindless body was now a force not to be reckoned with. There was nothing for the general to do but to bow and worship. As he respectfully knelt down in homage to this entity, his mind wandered. He knew this was an important assignment, but he realized that his pride had gotten in the way. He should have paid more attention to the details, but he had been leaving all that up to Humphreys. He searched his brain for information concerning the Nimrod and Gilgamesh of over 4,000 years ago. As a man, Nimrod had become a human Gibborim, a mighty man of renown who had accomplished something that only the Watchers had been able to do, and even at that, he had taken it to a whole new level. Through dark occultic practices and fallen angel technology, he had changed his chemistry and had become a Nephilim Gibborim, a god-man. He and Gilgamesh were considered to be one and the same. He had married his mother, who was an infamous sorceress, and more than adept in all forms of the occult. He knew that Seer was a clone, but he hadn't understood until now that she was specifically the clone of Semiramis, wife and mother of Gilgamesh. How had he missed that fact? The general wondered if Nimrod had always looked this atrocious, or if a change had occurred during the original transformation process. Either way, he had better mind his manners, for the subservient clone had become Nimrod, mighty hunter of men. Still kneeling, he glanced toward the pool of blood on the floor once again and noticed a pile of bones under the table that had been impossible to see from a standing position. Where was Humphreys?